The information expressed in the following podcast is intended for educational purposes only and was created by and belongs solely to Believe Limited and the Flow podcast and does not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Please speak to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions.
Here we flow. Hi, I'm Jessica and welcome to Flow. We're here like every month with Sarah Watson, sex therapist, and this month we have clinical social work therapist Mariam Saparamadu, and we all want to know, how's your flow? Welcome once again to Flow. As usual, we're going to start off Flow with a quick check-in to normalize the reality of menstruation. So everyone, how's your flow? Who wants to flow first?
I think you flow first.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm flowing. I'm flowing in my hormonal flow, not in my menstrual flow. So I'm just post-ovulation.
Nice.
Luteal, we call that.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. I've noticed a lot, like a different level of discharge this round, which I think is interesting. It's always a sign of ovulation, right? The change in the discharge, but
Yep.
just a lot. My body might just be like pushing some things out. I don't know.
Yeah. It's just like,
That's
get
where
out
I'm
of here.
at.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Get out of here. Yeah. I am follicular. I think I'm about 2 ovulates, but again, hormonal. So it's like, we'll see what happens. But I'm feeling a little spicy, a little more desire than usual. So we know that it's getting close. Ovulation, I mean. Ovulation is getting close.
Right. And by spicy, you don't mean the kind of spicy we get in PMS. You mean desire spicy.
Yeah, sexy spicy.
Yeah. Sexy spicy.
Yeah.
Baby.
Yeah. Miriam, how about you?
Miriam.
Yeah, where are you? What's going on?
A couple days out of my period, I just started using tampons, as one of my friends Annie shared with Sarah. I don't know what phase I'm in. I should probably know that. I can
I think it's
consult
called
my
follicular.
Glow app.
You got it.
Am I in follicular?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah. I actually haven't been paying attention to my phases now that I feel like I'm out of the trying to conceive space, but there was this like hyperfixation for a while to be like, am I ovulating? Am I not ovulating? What phase am I in? But yes.
Yeah. Well, great.
Yeah, how lovely. You do know what phase you're in. You're right after period. It has a name, but right, follicular, I always think of it like the follicle is going to create the ovulation. And then once you ovulate, it's like the lunar, like the moon is out and you're feeling spicy, so you're like ready to dance. And then PMS and menstruation come. So,
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to talk about so much. First, tampon use. We definitely are excited to cover that with whatever you're willing to share. We're going to get into it right after this quick break and word from our sponsor.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendi, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I didn't always feel empowered to speak up for myself or ask for the care and support I needed. Becoming part of a community and hearing other people's experiences helped to change my perspective. That's why my deciding factor is making my voice heard. To hear my story and access other helpful resources, drop by Von Vendi, that's VONVENDI.com/patient-stories.
And we're back on Flow with Mariam Saparamadu. Wow, you two know each other. So can we talk about how you two know each other?
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story, Mary? Why don't you tell the story and then I'll add anything in.
Sure. So I think I met Sarah the first time at a Healing Home event that they were having for moms at our friend Annie's house, who is also another perinatal therapist. And it was Sarah and I can't remember the name of your friend that joined.
Michelle, my business partner, Michelle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we just had this like wonderful like healing circle of like moms connecting about, I don't know, all things motherhood. And then I went to dinner one night and Sarah was also there and we connected again. And something about Sarah just clicked. I don't know.
Yeah.
I liked her vibe.
Sweet. Oh, thanks. I liked your vibe. That was so fun. I think we do need to talk. Our friend Annie, our mutual friend Annie, and this has an interesting throw to the hemophilia community, is Annie, who is the owner of Healing Home, which Mariam mentioned is a therapy practice here in Michigan. Annie used to be the clinical social worker for the Hemophilia Treatment Center here in Detroit. So my whole life always goes back to people I've met through hemophilia community. So that is part of the story too. So it kind of drew us all here. And I would say our dinner, which was lovely. And I was like, oh, please come on the podcast. Like, you must come on the podcast. So it's great. Yeah. But yeah, dinner with how many? There was like 6 therapists at dinner. So it's, you can imagine. Maybe you wouldn't imagine what kind of conversation it is, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I guess that's what, can we have a little insight in? I mean, no, we're going to have our own convo, but what level of sociological awareness must be present when therapists convene, you know? Like, what was on the table?
Yeah, it was, we talked about it all, right? We talked about
literally
the fun stuff, the hard stuff, the heavy stuff. I don't know. We didn't really leave anything out. I would say like good conversation.
Wonderful conversation. We definitely talked about sex. We talked about religion and God and what's happening in the Middle East and the war and like what is going on to our children, to then talking about sex toys with our server while eating sushi. And yeah, it was great.
Fantastic.
It was wonderful.
These are the conversations we know need to be flowing right now.
The conversations we're trying to bring to the podcast.
That's right. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So we do get to, so what a great group it sounds like was collected in our group. Mariam, what was your earliest experience with menstrual reality, or your perception of what it would mean to menstruate, maybe even before you started?
Yeah, good question. So this came up during our dinner. I'm not sure how, but I have no idea how this came up. But I shared with Sarah that I think we were talking about tampon use, which again, I don't know why. And I was sharing that, as I'm 35 and I've never really used a tampon because I was never taught how to do so. And it just kind of opened up this conversation to like, why did that happen? Like, what education did I have around like my body and my menstrual cycle? And so to answer your question, I think, when I was young, there had been whisperings, like, you had the 5th grade girls that were talking about the period, and like, you hear through the grapevine that something is going to happen and you want it to happen at some point or you're not in the cool club. And so I had a little bit of that. I think I had a little bit of like 5th grade, like sex education, but I only got the portion that they talked to girls about their stuff. And then fast forward a couple of years, I get my period on my 12th birthday. And now this day was an interesting day because I decided to wear white pants to school for my 12th birthday. And so I ended up getting my period. I think back then felt catastrophic. And now looking back, it was, it's not like I leaked everywhere, but, I was anxious after that. And what this kind of set the tone for having a lot of anxiety around my period, not having a lot of good education around it. And so what I started to do was I used to wear pads all the time. Like I thought that like any amount of discharge meant that like you are getting your period. And this sort of hypervigilance actually ended with me being in the hospital because I ended up getting toxic shock syndrome, not from tampon use, but from wearing pads.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
So the other piece of the story is that I actually never knew that I had toxic shock syndrome until I was like much later, like in my late 20s. So my mom came over one day, she handed me a stack of my like medical files and I was just kind of going through it. And I found the report from that night that I was in the hospital and the diagnosis, it said toxic shock syndrome. So I'm like, combing through my memories to be like, wait, what happened? How did I have this? How did I not know? I remember a very awkward conversation with, the doctor that was taking care of me. And he asked me about like tampon use and pad use. And I was just probably really awkward through all of it. And, something clicked and I was like, oh my God, I had toxic shock syndrome and I've never used a tampon. And so, that was kind of like my early experiences of menstruating and having a lot of anxiety around it. I think culturally, like I want to mention this piece because I think many other women can relate to this, where when there's not a lot of talk about your body and like what to expect and, like how to navigate these changes, that it can make a person feel really anxious. Mm-hmm. And so there was a cultural piece to that where these weren't things that were really talked about. I didn't grow up around a lot of family, a lot of cousins, or, like people that could have like clued me in, except for like, my sixth grade peers who didn't seem to know that much either.
Wow. Yeah. So what was the up level? Like at what point were you like, oh, that's what's happening in my body? When did that come into your life?
I mean, I think, so I came home that day from school after having started my period, and I knew that I got my period. I just didn't know what to expect. And so when I shared it with my mom, she was really emotional. She was like, you're a woman now. And I was like, what does that mean? That's a lot. I really don't know when I caught on to like, hey, I get this only once a month. Like, I don't know when that kind of clicked for me. I also have PCOS. And so I ended up having an irregular cycle, which added to a lot of the anxiety because I would skip months and not get a period. Right. And I don't know, maybe I think some point in my teens where I was having really bad cramps, I was taken to a doctor and they were like, we should put you on birth control. That'll regulate your cycle, help with the cramps. And I think maybe at some point that clicked. I was like, oh, you're supposed to get this monthly and you're not supposed to have these really terrible cramps.
Well, yeah, PCOS. So how did you discover that was going on?
I think it was because I was, interesting, because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, if I didn't know, at some point it must have clicked that I should be getting my period monthly. And then when I wasn't, then I think my mom took me to a doctor and they were like, hey, I don't even think I got any like ultrasounds or anything done. They were like, missed periods, PCOS.
Oh, wow.
I don't think there was, I don't remember having an ultrasound until I was like in my early 20s.
Interesting. So, lots of stuff to unpack about menstruation, right? Right. And I'm like thinking about our original conversation. I was thinking, I think we were talking about taking the kids to swim class because I think everyone at the table was a mom and we were just talking about like, what are we doing and things like that. And you were like, well, like I've got to figure this out. And so that kind of projected us into this conversation about using tampons. Mm-hmm. And I think I was like, you should just use a cup or something. And you were like, I haven't even used a tampon yet. So I guess my question too that comes up is, so you said mom was really emotional, to kind of throw back to that story of when you first got your period. And then she didn't say anything else about it to you. Like she wasn't like, this is how you use a pad. This is what's going to happen, right? Like she just was in her own little mom bubble.
Kind of. I mean, there was a little bit of like, she showed me what a pad was and like how to put one on. And I think there was some education. So what I think she educated me on was, so I was raised in a conservative Muslim household, and when women are on their period, they do not pray and they do not fast if it's during Ramadan. And so I think I got information from the place of like, oh, you're on your period, so you don't need to pray. And so there was some education, but mostly from kind of like a religious lens. Also, when you're on your period, and then you're not on your period, that you have to like there are some cleansing things that you need to do, as far as like to be, I guess, not dirty anymore, so that like you can pray. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the education came from a very kind of like religious lens, more so than like, you know, the period is like the first day of your cycle, and then like, you know, in 2 weeks you'll be ovulating, and like there was, I didn't know that happened until I was in the process of trying to conceive.
Interesting. I knew about the not fasting during Ramadan, but I did not know about the not praying.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that? Like, what do you, tell me more about that. I'm just very interested.
Yeah. So, Muslims pray 5 times a day, and growing up, you know, I grew up in a household where that was expected, right? So, women or girls at the age of 9, are required to start praying. And then for boys, it's the age of 15. And so, I didn't mind having my period in that sense, because it got me out of praying. So, you know, it's also like, and this is where kind of my memory gets a little bit fuzzy when I think about like the length of my cycle, because I used to like fudge it, right? Because I was like, you know, I don't think I'm quite done with my period yet. I think I need one more day.
Right.
And it was more so out of this place of like trying to get out of praying. So, yeah, when you're on your period, you don't have to pray. Could be an added bonus depending on, you know,
depending on
the person. And then when you resume prayers again, you have to like, there's like a certain way that you wash with like a certain intention. And then you are like in some ways purified, in a way that like you could enter a mosque again, or you could be on a prayer rug. But there's this like, you know, bleeding is kind of like synonymous with being dirty. And I think some of it kind of starts with some of this messaging too.
Yeah. Interesting. It reminds me very much of the Orthodox Jewish tradition of going to the mikvah.
Yeah.
Right. And then also like there's the clean white cloth they have to insert into the vaginal canal to make sure that there is no remnants of any blood. So then they can be with their partner again. I just didn't know that. Thank you. That's really interesting.
No, I actually find some of the Orthodox Jewish practices to be really interesting, because they feel very parallel to kind of how I was raised with like, there's a lot of like ritual and like a lot of intention, and like you are consciously taking part in these practices where it didn't feel like, you know, my peers could kind of relate to that, like outside of the Muslim community.
Right. Oh. So can we fast forward to tampon usage?
Yes. Let's do it.
How did it go? What happened? Was it because you had to go to swim class with your little? I'd love to hear more. Okay. Yes. What happened? How did it go?
So I am taking swim lessons because I didn't learn how to swim as a kid.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So my 5-year-old is in swim lessons now. And I was like, you know what? I think this is a life skill. I think I should know how to do this. And I enrolled into swim classes, and then also realized that like when you swim and you're on your period, you need to use a tampon. And so I was like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn how to swim and use a tampon. And so I somehow got away with it all these years through, through high school. I never had a swim class. I don't know how.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how that happened.
Okay.
Yeah. I somehow was able to avoid it. And
lovely.
I have some lovely friends who have tried to teach me throughout the years. And I was like, you know what? This feels weird. It's uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. And just kind of stuck to what I know. And yeah, swim was last week. And I was like, it can't be that hard. You know, I can figure it out.
Yeah.
And I went to Target. I got a box of tampons, and I was like, hey, if this takes me like, I don't know, there was like 24 in the box. Like if it takes me 24 tries, I will get it.
Yes. 100%. And you got it.
I got it. Yeah, I succeeded.
Yay, congrats.
Yeah.
May I
thank
ask
you.
how many tries it took?
It surprisingly only one. I in the past have like the one I got, I didn't pull the clicky thing. It didn't make the clicky sound. And so I knew to do that this time. So
Okay.
when you hear the click and then you use it, it's a very different experience than when you don't use the click. That doesn't work well.
Right. Okay. Yes, it has to be inserted all of the way, or it's going to be very uncomfortable.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's amazing. So, do you think? And again, you don't have to answer because it's new. Do you think you'll continue using them, or do you think? Like, how did it? I mean, obviously, you had the intention; it was for swim. But like in your day to day, when maybe you're not going swimming, what does that look like?
It actually felt a lot cleaner down there. Like it didn't feel gross and messy. So I think moving forward, I will probably use it on my heavier days, but I didn't like so much how it felt when I'm at the end of my cycle and like trying to take it out was kind of did not feel great.
No. Yeah. I think most people who menstruate have been there where that is like the least, it's just so uncomfortable. So totally makes sense. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's such an important thing to normalize that. Okay. Like you didn't use a tampon and it's not a big deal. And you figured it out with lots of cheering. I was like so excited. I will share with our listeners that Annie totally outed you and was like, she used tampon. I was like, yeah. And then I immediately was like, I had to text you. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I was very excited for you.
Yeah. No, I shared with my mom. She knew that I had swim. Right. And she was like, wait, but you had swim. And I was like, yes. And she was like, how did you go in the pool? I was like, they have things for that. She was like, what? You use a tampon? And she was kind of like flabbergasted. And I was like, yes, I used a tampon. And like, she said it in a way as if like nothing has been up there before. Like, it's like, yes, I used a tampon.
Oh, Mom. I want you to wrap up, some tampons for your mom and just be like, here you go, Mom. Like,
I don't know if she would know what to do with them.
She probably doesn't. She would probably be like, what is this? Yeah. Oh, bless her. Sweet mom.
Yeah.
So sweet. Good. So what do you think about taking it further in like a cup or anything like that? Any other products?
I don't know. A cup feels kind of scary. It feels a little messy. And I think even with the tampon use, and I think this kind of goes back to this like messaging around like blood being dirty that like for a long time, I never wanted to use a tampon because I'm like, I don't want to touch anything, right? Like you can just put a pad on and pull your underwear up.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Versus like go fishing for a string. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And so a little bit of it was just like, it felt a little like exposure therapy for me to be like, I can do this and I'm not going to die and I can wash my hands afterwards. But the cup feels a little messy with,
Fair
I think
enough.
I might just stick to the tampons for now.
Hey, I like it for you. I think that works. I asked a question. I haven't even used a cup because I haven't menstruated. Like I menstruated right after I had my daughter who was about to be 7 in a couple weeks for like 2 months and then had my IUD put back in. So it's been a very long time. So 7, like, I don't know, forever. So
it is a long time.
Yeah. Thank God for IUDs. So. Hey.
I do love a cup, I have to say.
Yes,
love a
you
cup
do.
that it exists. I do. But and also period underwear. I'm curious, Mariam, after your experience early with pads, do you like to use pads? Like was there a sort of after that discovery, a switch in how you felt about the I don't know what we call it. The general use.
You mean between the pads and the tampons?
Yeah, like what do you prefer now, I guess?
Yeah. I think moving forward, I'm going to use the tampons. And I think the days that I have a heavier flow, the tampon feels like I can do that. On the days that it's a slower flow, I think I might switch to a pad because Something about
Yeah.
taking out a tampon when there's not a lot of lubrication in there feels really uncomfortable.
It's the worst. Like, let's
It's
just
the
call that
worst.
the worst day of your cycle. Like, if you're like, oh, maybe it's going to be a little bit heavier, so let me put this in. And then you're like, oh, when you pull it, like, it's just, I'm just concerned about all of our vulvar tissue at that point. Like, what
the
is
membranes.
happening? Yeah. Ouch. So,
Yeah.
I suppose I wanted to ask if you could, with your knowledge now, as we flow on this show, we learn things as hosts all the time. And from where you are now, if you could talk to your younger self, is there anything you would specifically share with her about what she could know to help her experience?
Given what I know now, I think I would want to teach my younger self a little bit more about her cycle and what to expect. Because I think about, even the clients that I work with, sometimes there's not a lot of education on your own body. And I think that knowing more about your body is not knowledge is power, right? Like knowing what to expect. I think it can help people advocate for themselves. When something is off, like when something should be different. So when I think about my younger self, I think I would want to have a kind of a sit down conversation about like, this is your period. This is what to expect. If you are not getting a period every, 28 to 32 days, that like, maybe that's something to look into. I would also, I think back to my experience of meeting with my providers and getting a diagnosis of PCOS, that like, and not having a lot of diagnostic tools that were used at that time. They were like, hey, you can either, be put on birth control. I don't really remember getting an ultrasound. And I just think of like all the points that like someone could have provided education. And I know that like, many people feel like the healthcare system can kind of fail them in the sense where they like didn't receive the education that they needed. Our visits are really quick. Doctors are stressed for time. They're not able to spend a lot of time with their patients. So yeah, when I look back, I think a little education, I think would go a long way.
I want to ask you more also about the people you work with, but really quick on the note of education, I agree. And as I've been discovering, it's really hard to get curriculum approved to even teach the basics in schools. It's really challenging to check in to make sure parents are informed enough to be able to be that education source. So this is more like hypothetical, but where do you think people are able to learn? Where do people learn about what they need to know with menstruation?
Yeah. I do think some of it starts at home. Like I think about, my son, and he's 5 now, but as he kind of progresses through elementary and middle school and high school, like I don't see it as school, like solely the school's responsibility to teach him these things. That I do think that like a lot of these conversations begin in our homes, and it's not just around sex education, like so many different things, but that like we kind of set the tone, and it's maybe nice to get that supplementary information from sex ed at school. But I do think some of these conversations really start at home.
I hear that. Yes. And so that's, we hope that this conversation, of course, gets into people's home. And then I'm sure with your clients, as you mentioned, people you work with, let's take a step back. What inspired you to get into this kind of relational work that you do?
Yeah. So I am a child of immigrants. And I think just something from the very beginning, I was, I had this unique experience of, I was born and raised here, but at home I was exposed to one culture, and then outside of the home I was exposed to another culture. And I think from a young age, I was just really fascinated by like navigating these two different spaces. And something about me has always wanted to like bridge the gap. Like I think the gap used to feel really big, where it felt like, well, I'm not quite all Pakistani and I'm not quite all American. And like, where do I find a space for myself? And I think in doing so, I became really passionate about helping others do so. So I actually work with many people who are either immigrants, children of immigrants, or minority populations, kind of in this like space of trying to figure out a lot of stuff related to their identity, working through trauma, a lot of relational trauma, and like, complex PTSD. And so Yeah, I think just from a really young age, just having that unique experience and having exposure to two different cultures, I was really passionate about that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Much needed work to move us all forward. So what does it come up in any of your client work? The reality of hormones or menstruation? Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the conversations really didn't start with my clients until Roe versus Wade was overturned. And I think a little bit of this is related to, there's a little bit of discomfort about talking about our bodies and sexuality. And like, there's a cultural piece to it where it feels like sometimes that's not the issue that's like front and center in mind, like when clients come to me. But when Roe versus Wade was overturned, there were a lot of conversations around like, oh my God, I don't know any other forms of contraception, or like, I'm so worried that like, if I have sex, then like, I no longer have this right to get an abortion. And that really started a lot of the conversations around like, well, how well do you know your body? Do you know your cycle? Do you know, what it looks like to be in different phases of your cycle, and like the chances of conceiving every month. And so it kind of got the conversation started. And so I was able to kind of help people either find the resources that they needed, or at least get that conversation started with a provider. But yeah, that's kind of how it started to show up with my clients.
Yeah, incredible. What a moment, as we in the menstrual advocacy world know, it's a very important moment, because outside of anyone's ideology, the reality is Roe versus Wade being overturned means many women with extreme menstrual conditions who are going through miscarriages won't be able to get the help they need. It means many people with extreme conditions going through birth who need to make some tough choices to deal with their bleeding disorder won't be allowed to be considered a participant in decisions about their body. It's a significant issue that we've talked about. It's sort of the key to help people access the idea that knowing what's going on in your body is going to be a good base level to deal with the world as it is right now.
Yeah.
Golly. What would be the most important thing as far as awareness or something to consider? What I'm hearing from you is regrounding in your own body is the first step to dealing with the outside world. And that's what we encourage too here on Flow. But is there something to stay aware of that you encourage your clients, or that you yourself as a menstruator think about as we all face the world of having to communicate our needs to everyone else?
So
that's just honestly what I need to know right now. I'm like, what do we do?
What are we doing here? Like, how can we best like equip ourselves? Which is funny, because I think it's a conversation that I have with myself sometimes, where I'm like, what is actually happening? How it's almost like trying to figure out how would I address this with myself, so that like I could also share it with clients. Like, if I were to be in this situation, like, what are my options? Like, how do I advocate for myself? Like, how do I get the resources that I need? How do I, get the support that I need? I don't know. That feels like that's a heavy question.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's why we're unpacking it. We're not suggesting we have all the answers, but It is what we are actively discovering. Our listeners are discovering too. I mean, how does one step into a room knowing that in a medical room there might be a habitual dismissal of pain for my reproductive situation? And so I need to enter there, not just ready to receive help from the medical system, but really activated to present what I've been experiencing. Yeah. And how am I going to know that until I first know my own body and understand what I'm experiencing? So this first line of defense of self-knowledge is what I hold on to. Is just like, I do know myself. Other people don't know as well as I know what's going on in my body. Yeah. So when I think about what would I tell other menstruators, I don't know either, except know thyself, Shakespearean.
But it's like, it's kind of like, it happens by this like, almost like trial and error. So it's like, I saw so many different providers, and I just got tired of being dismissed. And at some point there's a shift from like, I think sometimes people see anger and frustration as a bad or a negative thing, but I often think it can be this like catalyst for change, to be like, I'm tired of not being heard. I'm tired of like people not taking my experience seriously. And so for many people who don't have someone in their life that can kind of guide them through that process, to be like, this is how you advocate for yourself, or this is what you need to know about your body, that they learn kind of by this like trial and error. And then like anger and frustration end up being the catalyst where like something needs to be different. I'm tired of doing this over and over again. And so something I work on with a lot of my clients, and not just in relation to, you know, getting reproductive or like reproductive care or like around their cycles, but just in general, when they're meeting with other providers and feeling like they're being dismissed, it's something about being grounded in your truth. And I think that can be really hard to get to when you don't have people on the outside that have helped strengthen that voice for you, so that you've been able to internalize it. I think that like when you have a really supportive environment that's like, yes, you are worthy. Yes, you are worthy of being listened to, and you deserve to get the care that you need. When you don't have that, you have to create it for yourself. And I think sometimes that doesn't happen until you kind of just get sick of it. You're just like, I'm so tired of the bullshit.
Yes, being tired of the bullshit. I suppose folks can reach out to find that voice to help them, like to you as a social work therapist, like to Sarah as a sex therapist. There are people to reach out to talk to when you know, I could use that voice in my head. But in the meantime, we certainly on Flow want to help be that voice in your head when you're listening. We're going to repeat things like, you know your body, you know, it's exhausting that we have to get sick and tired before change happens. But if you're at that place, we're going to be encouraging the anger to get you to the care you need. Your diagnosis journey is the last thing I wanted to touch upon. Was there anything in a relief in the internal sense when you understood that there was something not normal to the normal flow going on?
Yeah. You mean in relation to my PCOS diagnosis, or when I ended up with...
Pardon. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I think it felt like there was a lot of like, you know, kind of question marks around my cycle. Why am I not getting my period as often as my friends are? Am I doing something wrong? Should I be doing something differently? And so I think the diagnosis did come with some relief, because it felt like, okay, I can put a label on this. Like I can, you know, kind of start to wrap my head around it. And, you know, this is like, you know, if I was like 15 or 16, this is also when like the internet is like kind of up and coming, and there's like more access to resources through the internet. And so I think something about having a diagnosis made me feel like I can wrap my head around it, and maybe there's like some sort of treatment, or there's a game plan. But yeah, I would say definitely relief with diagnosis.
Yes, which, you know, so then it's about knowing what's going on. It's not a disease to be menstruating, but we do sometimes feel like it's a diagnosis. People have to realize they have a thing that's going to happen to take care of every month. And then sometimes in the caring of it, it may become clear that there's something further to investigate. And that's what we like to spend time here on Flow encouraging folks to do. Thank you so much for flowing with us. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, those who listen to Flow?
So I think what I would want to share with the listeners is that the importance about getting educated on your bodies and finding providers that believe you. If you are working with someone that continues to dismiss you and make you feel small, then they are not the provider for you. And that's okay. You can find another provider. You do not have to stay with someone that continues to make you feel small and does not understand your experience, because I really truly believe that everyone is an expert in their own experience, their own lived experience. And yeah, don't be afraid to find a provider that works well for you.
Everyone knows their own experience. I mean, and that goes for any relationship, not just your provider, right? If you're being dismissed or made to feel small,
Yes.
Get out of there.
Yes.
Just because they're wearing a white coat doesn't mean there isn't someone else with that white coat who's ready to listen to you.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendy, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, I'm Nicole. Discussing certain topics can make us feel vulnerable, embarrassed, or just plain awkward. But real issues deserve real talk. It's time to normalize talking about what's happening in our bodies, especially when it comes to our health needs. To get the conversation started, download a discussion guide at Von Vendi, that's VONVENDI.com/VonVendi-support.
So then how could folks find you if they want to work with you or follow your work? Do you appear online? Do you connect with others on the digital sphere?
Yeah. So if others want to work with me, I have a Psychology Today profile, which I can share with you. I don't know if you guys have show notes, but
we'll put it in the show notes for sure. Yes.
Yeah. And I do have social media that I do not use that often. So I don't know if that's really helpful. My Instagram account has 2 posts. But I don't know, maybe this will be the thing that gets me to start doing more social media stuff.
Perhaps. Well, we're going to post clips from this episode because we're so grateful for all of your offering of story. Again, our listeners really get invigorated by hearing it told so that they can then tell as well and share their experience. I will say that, and maybe someone will find you on social media who wants to work with you. So how great you have those open portals there just so people can get in touch. All of that will be in our show notes. And listeners, next month we have our creative director, Amy Board, here with her mom. It's Mother's Day month. We'll see you in May. Flow is produced by Bloodstream Media. Big shout out to our creative director, Amy Board, and to our editor, Alex Watson. New episodes will be available the second Thursday of every month.
Hey, that's the day after I start menstruating.
And thanks to our sponsor, Takeda, for their support of Flow.